In this part, let's talk about Ansible inventory. So what is an inventory? An inventory is a list of all your hosts, a list of hosts that Ansible will be working with. Your Ansible inventory file could be in YAML format, or it could be INI. So this is a sample INI file, a sample INI format. And you can see this just lists the different hosts, and this is a way to group them. So these are two servers that are grouped under web server. And then this also is another grouping of DB servers. They've been grouped there. So this is something you can do. You can group your servers, and you can see this one is ungrouped. So this is INI format. If you see any file, inventory file that is like this, that is INI format. In YAML, you can also create a YAML format. Let me bring this out. In YAML, you'll see that the ungrouped host will look like this, and the other grouped ones will be like this. Point is, you can have either a YAML inventory or INI inventory. In most cases, you're going to find that most people just use the INI format, and they only use the YAML format if they're creating dynamic inventories that will be used programmatically at some point, because it's much easier to work programmatically with YAML than it would be to work with an INI inventory. Bring this back there. Let's hide it under that. Default host. So you have a default host. When you install Ansible, you will have a default host file. And you can use this host file, but usually you'll find that you'll just create your own inventory file that you can use. So depending on how you installed Ansible, you may find that this file doesn't exist for you. It may be in a different path. If you installed Ansible via Python pip, then it will be in a different location than someone who installed using apt. And in our setup, we installed it using apt package manager. Come back to the notes, and I told you these notes are available for you. You just go to this link and you can copy any code that you need to copy. So for here, let's check if we have this default inventory file. I'll just open up Ubuntu 22.04, our WSL setup. We can open this. We can even open it with Visual Studio Code, Control-Shift-V. So if Control-Shift-V doesn't work for you on your WSL, come here under Settings, Properties, and use Control-Shift-V, enable that. Code etc. That will open that using VS Code. And you can see this is our default inventory. So let's just go through it a bit, and you can see this is a default Ansible hosts file. It should live in that location. So comments begin with that. Blank lines are ignored. Group of hosts are delimited by a header. You can enter host names or IP addresses. A host name or IP can be a member of multiple groups, and we're going to see that as well at some point. So example 1, ungrouped hosts. These are ungrouped hosts. You can see they don't have this at the top. If they have this at the top, it means that they've been grouped as web servers. You have web servers here. You can see that is a host name, that is a host name, and that is an IP address. So you can use either. But just remember, if you're using a host name, then you need to add some DNS records to ensure that this is reachable. Otherwise, just use the IP address. If you have multiple hosts following a pattern, you can specify them like this. So www.001.006, this simply means that www.001.example.com, www.002 up to 006.example.com. And the same is true for this one as well. So that's just another grouping of DB servers. You can group them like that. If you have web servers, DB servers, mail servers, you can group them based on locations. We're going to talk about that in a moment. So that's our default host file. If you installed Ansible using sudo apt install as indicated here, if you installed it using this step, then you can find your host file, your default host file under etc Ansible hosts. You'll find it there. Go back to inventories, come back here. So we've spoken about this. Oh yeah, you can also list your hosts, files, Ansible, all -- list hosts. Now here you'll see that we have Ansible all -- hosts, And then we have the same with a -i inventory file. So the -i tells Ansible which inventory to work with. In this case, if you do this, it's going to go for the default host file. If you're going to work with a default host file, maybe within your project, like we're going to do, you can either define the identity of the file, or you can add this path to your Ansible CFG. And I did a long video about Ansible configuration. You can look at that part for Ansible configuration. We're working inside of WSL. If you don't know how to connect WSL and VS Code, go to that last video. Let me just add a new file, and we're just going to call it inventory. We'll just call it inventory. We can open our terminal, open integrated terminal here. We can do Ansible all -- list hosts. So this is going to list our default host items. You can see warning, provided host list is empty, only local host is available. So this is taking that from our default host, and we want to work with that. If you want to work with this, you have to add the identity invent tab, identity of this file -i there, enter, and you can see our host file is empty. It's telling us it's empty, so we can add something here. Let's just add some of the samples we had here. We can just add this, copy that into our inventory file, Control V. There we go. That's our inventory file. We have that, and we have these ones. So let me do Control L to clear the screen, and then I will do Ansible all -- list hosts again. And -i means that we're working with this inventory. So it says it is empty. Oh, that's because I have not saved. Control S to save it, and once we save, it should tell us that we have this list of hosts. It will list all the items that are inside our inventory file. So if you want to view them based on these groupings, you can also categorize them based on the groupings. And to do that, you'll use an Ansible CLI tool called Ansible Inventory. Inventory -- graph and -i. We're going to get rid of this -i very soon. Just wait a moment. Inventory, enter. And it's going to show you how they're grouped. Ungrouped, we have one web servers. These are the web servers. DB servers. These are the DB servers. So one step at a time. The next thing, let's get rid of the -i so that we can just know which inventory file we want to work with. In fact, we can put our inventory files in one folder. So I'll drag that inside there, move it. We can even add another one. The one for YAML, you can also do the one for YAML. So we can do inventory2 dot YML. We can copy some samples for a YAML. So this is the same, defined in a YAML format. So let's come back to VS Code, Control V, Control S to save. So this is just the same, inventory2.yaml. Let's just bring this up again. And for this one -i, we want to use, so we have to go inside of this inventories /. So this is just a path to where your inventory is. So we have to go inside of inventories, and we want to work with the second one, YAML. Unable to pass, root_stoots YAML is an inventory source. No inventory was passed. So let's see what is the issue here. Okay, it is not inside there. Move it. We were supposed to create it inside there. After moving it, let's just run that again. and let me rename that inventory2.yaml, Control L. Right, now you see you can work with a YAML file or you can work with an INI file. So let's say we want to define an inventory source so that you don't have to go through this step all the time of adding -i. In the root directory, you can add what is called Ansible CFG. Ansible.cfg, and you want to define hosts. So sometimes you don't know what you're doing. So you go to Ansible documentation. So just get used to using the documentation to get what you're looking for, because it has everything you want to do. You'll always find the answer in the documentation. Most of the times, that is. Ansible configuration. Ansible configuration and configuring Ansible configuration settings. Let's go with this. So I did talk about this extensively in the Ansible CFG part. If you don't remember that, just go and check it. I want to work with hosts. Control F. Let me find inventory. Default host list. So if you want to work with the default host list in your INI configuration, the key is inventory. You can define it also as an environment variable, which I spoke about. But of course, we want to define it inside our Ansible CFG. That is what the INI here stands for. I'll just put there paste inventory is equals, and I will just give it the entire folder, and that is this folder that I created here for inventory. Anything that I add here, if in future I add any inventory here, it will automatically get passed. I'm just going to leave it like that as inventories. Let's see how it's going to deal with this. Control L to remove everything else, and then let's do this and see. L ungrouped. And then again, the problem we're having is just the same problem of me not putting this outside where it's supposed to be. Move it. Ansible.cfg should be in the root, not inside of that directory. And then from here, you're going to get the path, absolute path for that file, for that directory, or any inventory that you want to work with. If you want to add the path there, you have to know your paths, okay? So you see, if you're here, then this path is correct. And if I do that, it should show all our inventory. Let's see what the error. Again, you can see we didn't tell it which part to add this. So this is actually a very important thing, and you don't have to worry how you're going to know where should this be, where should I add that. All this is in the documentation. If I come here, the key was inventory, and I did copy the key, but I did not tell it which section it should use. So this is also very helpful. The documentation has literally everything you need to know to define your Ansible configuration file. So if you want to add any other thing, you can know where it is. The section is in defaults. So we're going to add it inventory under defaults. So let's come back, and we're going to put it at the very top. These are defaults. So under defaults, there are certain things that go under defaults. Maybe you want to use a default SSH key, you want to use a default username, default something. All those you can define under defaults, but you don't have to worry memorizing which items will go under which sections of the Ansible config file, because the documentation has it. At some point, I'm going to show you how to use Ansible docs right here on the terminal to get any information that you want about any element for Ansible. So if we do this again, you'll see that it's going to list all our hosts right here. So it doesn't repeat itself. If you can see, it does not repeat itself. Let's do Control L again. And we're going to do Ansible. Actually, we did use that. let's just remove this so that it can list hosts. And it's going to list all our hosts as they are. Let's come back here and inventory.yaml. Let's change this to mail 2. Control S, Control L to clear the screen. Run it again. And you can see mail 2. It doesn't repeat itself. So that's a lot we've covered in a short span of time. Let's see if there's more we can cramp in here before I end the video. So coming back here, we have inventory. We've spoken about these types of inventory, INI, YAML. You can list your inventory. And then let's look at host grouping. So we've said something small about host grouping. And we said that in YAML, that's how you list. That's how you group your hosts. You group them like that. And YAML, remember, this is 2 spaces in here. So if you miss any space, you're going to have an error in your YAML formatting. INI, you can see it's pretty easy. Just put them in a square bracket and add the list. You can have the same host on multiple groups. And you can make up a group of other groups, and we're going to see about that in a moment, child grouping. So when you're grouping, Ansible advises that you group them based on what, where, and when. So your resources, you're the one who knows at what stage they are, where they are, or what they're used for. So you think about that when you're grouping your hosts. For instance, if you have web servers, under what, you can group them as web servers, DB servers, load balancers, mail servers, and so on. Where are these hosts? If you have hosts in different regions, you can list them like that. Maybe you have some in America, some in Europe, Asia. You can group them appropriately. And then for when, if a server is for dev, is for development purposes, is for test, is for production, or is for staging. If it is a production server, you can list it under production server. Maybe you have PHP production, Java production. You can have those different groups, and then you can also group those together as one production server. And we're going to see that in a moment, called parent-child grouping. This is pretty self-explanatory. You just group them based on what, where, and when. So that's grouping. That's a way you can group your servers. And then grouping groups. So this is what I'm talking about, child grouping. You can have web servers in London. You can have web servers in Chicago, and then you can group all web servers by combining the 2 different groups. That's what's happening here. And you can see this is how it's done in INI, and this is how it's done in YAML. I'm going to come back here, and I want to be explicit and change them based on what I'm working with. So here I'm going to just work with inventory first. So it's going to work with that. So we can just try it. And you can see it doesn't bring the items that we have for YAML. I'm just going to Control L to clear the screen. And then I want to do that child grouping example. We're down here under parent child grouping. So here, let's start with this for INI. And I'm just going to copy. Then let's go here under our INI, and we'll remove all these other hosts and just paste in the one that we've taken from those nodes. So here you can see we have an ungrouped one. Mail.example is ungrouped. And then we have web servers in London. There are web servers in Chicago. Then there are DB servers. And then finally we have here a parent group that is consistent of the web servers in London and web servers in Chicago. So this will create the web servers group. Look at the format. You have to add the word children, and that's going to add these 2 because these are children of that. This is their parent. Now let's do the Ansible inventory -- graph. So when we do this, it should show us a list of our hosts with their groups. You can see there we have the one which is ungrouped. We have our DB servers, we have our web servers, and then under web servers, you can see that it consists of web servers in London and web servers in Chicago. Another point I'll make after making an example with YAML. Let's do an example with YAML. And for demonstration purposes, let's say we just want to work with this inventory, YAML. So I will close that. Let's come back and copy the examples we have here from the YAML example, copy Ansible inventory 2 for YAML, Control A, delete everything, Control V. So just note that it's very important to know your spacing in YAML, because if you miss any spaces, you're going to get an error. So those are 2 spaces, those are 2 spaces, and that is recommended. Even by default, VS Code will usually give it 2. So even if I was to press tab, it will give me 2 spaces. If I go enter, it will take me there, but let's just go there. If I press tab, it will give me 2 by default if I'm working with YAML. If you're working with something else, then it will not give you 2. But by default, if you're working with YAML, it's going to give you 2. And spaces are really not that important. It can actually help you. It can actually help with legibility. So you can add that space. It's not going to affect anything. Just remember that if you have one item, like here you can see we only have an item here, and it has not been listed with a key pair value. So that means that you have to end it with that colon. If you miss the colon, you're going to get an error. And we're going to see an example where we have a key and a value. Let's run this example, and this is the same thing as this, okay? It's just the same thing written in YAML format. All of that you can find in the website notes. So here, just the same thing, web servers group, and then the children for that are these 2 web servers here, are these 2 groups. Okay, so this is a format of how you put it in a YAML inventory file. So let's come here and into VS Code, terminal down here. I will do Control L and I will run that again. And you can see it is just the same thing. It gives us group, DB servers groups. It has these hosts. And then the web server group consists of the 2 children, which are web servers London and web servers Chicago. The last point I want to make here before we move on to the next item is every item will belong to at least 2 groups. Here, there's a group I have not spoken about, but it exists by default, and it is called the all group. All consists of all the items that Ansible can pass. You can see they all fall under all. Every list, every host you have that Ansible can pass will be defined under all. That is the one group. And then the other group could be ungrouped. You can see in this case, this belongs to ungrouped because it has not been grouped as a DB server or as a web server. And then it can also be all and a custom group that you've created. So every host must belong to at least 2 groups. The first group is all, and every host belongs to all. So that makes sense. And then the second group could either be ungrouped or it could be the other group that you've created. So let's see what's next here. I know there's one thing that we still need to do before we end the video. So grouping groups, we've grouped our groups and we've spoken about that. Now let's move on to the next part, which I believe, let's see if this is the last item here. Yes, this is the last item on inventories. So the video is ending soon. Just bear with me for a little while longer. So host aliases. You can give your hosts aliases. If you have a host, and usually you'll find like AWS host names, they're pretty long. So in most cases, you may want to give them an alias instead of using AWS dot whatever, those many numbers, the IDs. You just use mail. You'll just use it there as mail0 and it will represent that. Web server web1 will represent web1.example.com. If you've used AWS and you've seen the host names that they usually give you by default, you know what I mean. Sometimes you may want to just use the alias for the host name. And to do it, this is how you do it. Ungrouped, here we have mail0 as the host name, and then we define the Ansible host is equals to that. And then web servers. Web server 1, Ansible host, we've defined it as web1. The second one, Ansible host, we've defined it as that. And then coming to YAML, ungrouped hosts and a mail.0 will be the host alias, and then Ansible host, we define it as that. So take note of this, take note of the colon. This is what I was telling you. If you have a colon, so the key and the pair, you don't have to put anything at the end. But if you only have one item, always make sure you end it with a colon. that is in YAML. If you don't, it's going to give you an error. So let's come back here to the notes and copy some things. So host aliases, you can come here and read the notes that I added here. So I'm just going to do the YAML one because the INI one is pretty easy. Look at it, very easy, right? You can do this as an example for yourself. Let's come back to our YAML inventory. And I'm going to Control A, Control V. So you can see we have the ungrouped group. And under this, we have one host. And the host alias will be Ansible host mail example.com. So web servers here, you can see the hosts that we have. We have web1 alias for that, and then web2 alias for that. And you can add another one. So your homework is to add more. Add another group here for DB servers. Use this example that we used here to add another host alias for DB servers. Once we have that, I'll just come down here to the terminal. I'll do Control L, and then I will do Ansible inventory graph to show me the hosts that we have. And when I do the Ansible graph thing, you'll see that it shows me ungrouped. Why is it showing me ungrouped twice? Oh yeah, that is because the default ungrouped is usually a small letter. And there I am, and here I am giving it a capital letter. So make sure you remember that it is case sensitive. Control S, and then I will Control L to clear the screen, and then I will do this again. And now you see we have one ungrouped, right? So make sure you remember that when you're following along with me. So you'll see we have the host. The host alias is the one that is being shown as the host. Host alias we have there. So you can add another one, and that is your homework or your assignment. Just add DB servers and add the host items that we had. Create an alias for each of them. And make sure that it is successfully recognized and passed as an alias like that. So if you have any question about this, just feel free to let me know. On the other hand, I've also left this untouched. So make sure you're looking at that as an example in the INI format. And make sure you do add the DB servers like I've told you to. Key takeaways here. In YAML, make sure these are 2 spaces. Put everything correctly. 2 spaces there, 2 spaces. If it is only one item, like here, make sure it's ending in a colon. If it has 2 items, and this is the key, and that's the value, make sure you have that. And this is important. Don't leave out the space. If you leave out that space, that is an error introduced. And I'm just going to do Control S, and you'll see that now suddenly things are not working fine. So I'm going to do Control L, and you'll see this error. You'll see this error, failed to pass it. Found a problem here, right? That is important. Make sure you have a space for the key right there. So what have we looked at in this video? Let's just do a quick summary. We'll come back here. So we've spoken about inventories. We have said that we have INI inventory, YAML inventory, and you've seen how to work with them. We've said that there's a default Ansible host file that comes with Ansible, whether you install it via Python pip or you install it via the package manager like I did in the previous part. You'll have a default Ansible host file. However, the location for that file may be different depending on how you installed it. If you install it via the package manager, of course you have access to the etc directory, and you'll find the host file in there. And then host grouping, you can group your hosts based on what is the server for. Is it a web server, DB server, and so on? Where is the server located? It could be in Chicago, London, it could be in the US, Europe, wherever the server is. And then what is the stage of this server? If the server is currently a dev, test, or production server, you can group the different servers as so. And then you can group your groups. So if you have a group of web servers in London, a group of web servers in Chicago, you can create a web servers group derived from web servers in London and web servers in Chicago. And make sure that you add children there, that is a format. Don't forget that. You add that to reflect that these are children groups of this. This way, someone won't confuse this as host names or host aliases. And then here, you can do the same in a YAML format. And then host aliases, we've said if the host name is too long or you just want to give them host names, then you can do aliases for your host names. In this case, mail for INI file, the host is that, and this is a format for that in INI, and this is a format for that in a YAML inventory. So ungrouped, remember this is a small u because Ansible is case sensitive. That pretty much ends this video about Ansible inventories. If you have any question about this, you can always look at the documentation, or first off, you can ask me any question that you have. I will see how to assist you. The next part, we'll see how we can set up some Vagrant managed nodes. All right, that's it for this video. If you have any question, feel free to let me know. Feel free to use the Ansible documentation because everything you want to know is already there.